Hello, I'm Susan Green, Associate Curator, Special Collections, Archives and Research at the Philbrook Museum of Art, and I am so thrilled to be able to visit with Chris Ramsay today. Chris is an amazing artist, a member of our community, a professor of metals, jewelry, and 3D design at Oklahoma State University and head of the art department. And we are so lucky that in our Tulsa Treasures exhibition, we have one of your objects. So welcome. We're so glad that you were able to visit with us today.
Well, thank you. I'm so glad that you have invited me and have an interest in the work that I do and the things that I collect. I really appreciate that. It's exciting to be part of the exhibition.
Absolutely. One thing we noticed when we were visiting with different people who collect for Tulsa Treasures is that, of course, artists collect. Artists collect objects to incorporate or to inspire their own artwork, but they also collect things they love. So we were absolutely thrilled to get to have your recollection table, and I'm going to share an image of it for the people who are watching. So this is a sort of a combination of images, but the recollection table in the gallery and sort of a sweeping view, raking view of the top of the table, and then a couple of close-ups. And so would you tell us a little bit about recollection?
Sure. Well, it is really kind of an evidence of what I've done throughout my entire life, and it's, I guess, part of my character, and somehow life and art are really one and the same to me, and the kinds of things that I've picked up and collected are really random, but oftentimes they remind me of a place or a moment, or they're just an interesting shape or color. Especially when I first started picking up things as a kid, I would pick them up for their surface or just the curiosity of it, and I'd hold it in my hand and I'd put it in my pocket, and then I'd get back home later in the day and I'd empty my pockets and arrange things on the shelves in my room, and had always wanted, I'd again done this throughout my life, but early on I always wanted to somehow be involved with the objects, have my mark or my hand in them, but I had no skills to know how to manipulate those objects. And so I would set maybe a bottle cap on top of or a button on top of a stone, and I envisioned it being part of that stone, but I obviously had no skills at that time. And so perhaps later on we could talk about that, but I think the thing that's really relative here to the table is this arranging and listening to relationships that happen. And that's something that I recall doing as a child in my room, putting objects next to one another. And I just use the term listening, although it's not a voice, it's an inner voice that I feel. And things seem to be harmonic and kind of relate to one another. Sometimes there's humorous combinations, and sometimes it's just the relationship that feels right. And I think this table is very much about that. In fact, I did an installation at the OSU Art Museum that was about objects and how we, as human beings, have a tendency to bestow power upon them. Sometimes it's felt, but other times it's power that we give to those objects based on a reminder it has of an experience in life or someone, a place, moment in time. And so basically I'd ask people to share with me an object and write about that. And in a vault in the museum, I don't recall how many objects it was, but it was several hundred, that I created individual stands for and collected their stories and arranged them in such a way so that people could share their stories about their objects. And I think that's something that happens as people view the table. At least that's the feedback I get from people, is that it takes them back in time. It's a recollection of something that they had in their life and their moment in time. And that's why I call it recollection. It's a collection of objects, but also it's, again, a recollection. And so there are these overlapping kinds of relationships there that I think are really interesting.
Absolutely. And there are so many different types. It's like this discovery process, this process of wonder, to look at the table, to look at the objects. There might be a glittery brooch next to an embedded fossil, a bird's feather next to a shell. And the way you've arranged the objects, the way that you've combined the objects, there's a rhythm to it. There's a beauty to the discovery of the objects. And I think that your idea, what you just mentioned about this kind of communal recollection is absolutely apt. I was visiting with a colleague, and I was listening to him talk about, oh, I remember finding something like this in South Texas. I remember going to the zoo and getting the flattened pennies, so that you have a collection of the flattened stamped pennies.
I love
so
that.
talking about that and how the process worked, or going to national parks or seeing these. So there are stories that emerge that
Definitely
I'm sure
narrative.
you never would have imagined when you were creating this.
No, well, actually, not for other people. That's absolutely right. But for myself, another thing about that, yes, narratives develop between these objects, and something that I think is important for me to share is that what the table seems to communicate to others, at least again from feedback I get, is the same kind of experience that I get in the studio. And what I do is I set up relationships. I, try things next to each other. And that's why I have a lot of things, as you'll see later, in bowls and laying out objects, because I just listen, and they give me that narrative. They give me that kind of feedback that helps guide my work. And so one time I was in my studio working on a specific project, and I had all the parts laid out, and I was getting ready. Well, this guest asked me, "How do you get started?" And I thought they were talking, about the mechanics of the piece and so forth. And so I started right there, as if that's where it all began. But that's not where my work begins. My work really does begin in going for walks and going to antique stores and yard sales, and finding things out in walks in nature, or just on at the public school parking lot where buses run over number 2 pencils, and they turn into these wonderful objects that I dearly love. It's just, it starts from just being outdoors and collecting and finding things, and then bringing them together and listening for those kind of relationships. And then I, of course, have other priorities in my work, different goals that I am wanting to achieve with it. But these objects become very much a metaphor for life cycles. Mm-hmm. If you notice, most of them are worn, torn, weathered, aged in some way. And through my life, I've really learned to see these as not just beautiful objects and memories, but also as a metaphor for this greater cycle in life, that objects come from the earth, have a specific kind of function, and often I'm observing them on their way back into the earth, back into those materials, and back into the back end of that cycle. And I find that interesting, and it helps me think about, sort of my place in this world and role in life as well. So, they're pretty loaded for me, beyond just being a rock or a photograph or whatever.
And I have another image here, sort of a couple of other close-ups, but I think it's so, something else is you're paying attention to the world around you. You're looking at the ground around you and in the stores, but then you arrange them in different ways. So can you talk a little bit about how you arrange them?
Sure. That upper left-hand corner, you have an image of uh, geological specimens. And I have been fascinated with the way that scientists and illustrators throughout the history of illustration and documentation have presented these objects and the spacing, the activation of the negative space, and um, presenting the objects. I love the little numbers that are next to them and the way the old style handwriting that's on it. Do you know Pitt Rivers Museum?
No.
Oh my gosh, it's in Oxford at the Natural History Museum. Oh my gosh, I'm going to send you a picture of it, but we should actually insert one here. It's absolutely incredible. And this guy, General Pitt Rivers, would go out on these expeditions, and every object he collected, he would write a hand tag on it, and the objects are put together with his original tags. But the way that museum is set up is it's a topic, say currency, like money, and it's not just from a specific time or specific culture. It's global and not specific to time. So it's all different concepts of currency and money, whether that's bones or stones or gold or whatever. And it's that same kind of idea of collecting and energy, but there's just a real beauty for me in the simplicity in the way that these images are spread out and arranged. And on the right side, there are actually two posters, Audubon charts, which are classroom charts from 1898, actually the one on the left, and the other one is just a few years after that. They're original, and they're absolutely gorgeous. And the one on the left is actually the first object I bought when I moved to Oklahoma.
Oh, really?
Yeah, 1986, down in Oklahoma City at their large antique show that they have at the fairgrounds. And it was $20, and I was like, oh my gosh, I don't know if I can afford that, but it's been one of my favorite objects. Like, I think about if there was a fire in the house, wherever I go, I would run and grab that because I just love it. But it has that same kind of awkward space, which is about sharing information. And no matter which bird you look at, it's the one that's in focus, and everything else around it is arranged. And I had told you I was really interested in Tom Utick's work as well, and that painting at Crystal Bridges that he did is just fantastic for that similar kind of way. This is done for illustrative, kind of purposes, but it also, for me, kind of has a memory. Like I look out in my backyard, and the Baltimore Orioles just arrived. The scissor-tail flycatchers just arrived a few days ago, and it's all so exciting. And I, in my mind's eye, can see them flying across the yard, and it's like that moment. It's frozen. And so it's like if you had a camera and you could just stack all these images on top of each other, they would all be in that same place, occupying it. And so anyway, I love that. And I think to me, it's fairly obvious when I look at the table and that image down in the bottom right, how the arrangement of objects really echoes the kinds of things that are there in that Audubon chart and in that geological illustration. And
it really does show this organizational structure, but it may, like with the currency, with the museum in Oxford, it may not be any relationship to geography or any relationship to time. It is just a visual organization so that you can absorb the information. But there's such a rhythm to your work. And there's also, I wanted to show, you see that in your surroundings. So these are some photographs you sent to me of your home and your studio. And so your home, your surroundings are just as well organized with this beautiful rhythm and this beautiful understanding of space, positive, negative, the objects, each object getting a sense of value, a weight, but then a relationship with the objects around it.
Oh, thank you. I love honoring the object, and I love the just kind of the joy of looking at things. And it's funny too because there's a balance within all of that that actually is calming to me, even though there's a lot of objects there. And so that's important. And it's also, yeah, the thing about the wall piece there is what I like so much about that is my wife and I combine several objects from our lives together. So it's sort of a memory wall too of places and people and things from our family. And so it has a lot of ties to our lives. And I guess that's the other thing I want to say is that there's not much difference for me between life and art. They really are kind of one and the same. At least I like when you asked me what I collect around the house, and I just started going around with a camera and just kind of snapping shots. I was like, oh, I guess I do collect a lot of things. But I wasn't necessarily thinking about it because it's just what I do,
Well, it looks like just a beautiful surrounding, and just it's really comforting to me too. This like these you can see that there are memories. You can see that things are important, and there is this balance. And then I'm also so this is an image of your studio. Would you tell us a little bit about your process?
Well, sure. You had asked me, how I store objects and such, and the upper left, and also in the kind of overall view, you can see it's very handy to use inexpensive shoebox items. And I used to have labels on them, but they wore off. And plus, I kind of knew where things were anyway, so that was kind of silly. And plus, they're somewhat transparent, so I can see in. And I have them grouped, so I have a mental map of where I can find something. But they're like things in the containers. But as I'm working, I find it to be extremely helpful to use these wooden salad bowls, which I pick up for 50 cents or so at a yard sale. And first of all, I love the wooden bowls. They're absolutely gorgeous. And then I have an old library table that's very long. Actually, I have two very long library tables. You're just seeing one here. And on that, it allows me to kind of collect things. And when I like I said, when I was a kid, I would collect stuff and I'd lay it out on my shelves. Now I collect it and I bring it to my studio, and it'll often go in a bowl with things that it sort of feels like it goes. And then later on, I sort of dump the bowl out and arrange. And as I'm working on pieces, like, I don't know I guess you can kind of see on the table at the end on some of those stones, there's objects laid onto them. Also in the foreground, there's some fern fossils laid out on top of another fossil and some other kinds of things. But I'll just kind of stack stuff, which goes right back to, again, being in my room. But ultimately what I do is I try to integrate them so that it feels like they're all, part of the same object.
There we go. So let's talk about one of your objects that you've created.
Okay. Well, we were talking about how people collect and so forth. Well, this was very surprising to me. My grandmother and grandfather lived in Iowa, and when my grandmother passed away, my mom and I went in and did the estate sale, cleaning up of the house and such. And this old 1930s, 40s milk glass salt and pepper shaker was on the back of my grandma's stove, and I thought, oh, that's sure nice. I'd like to keep that. And so I picked it up, and when I picked it up, it didn't feel like pepper. It actually kind of jiggled and made a tinkling sound. And I thought, the heck? And I unscrewed the top, and she had collected some of her little favorite shells and stones and things inside there, and she had them on her stove. And I thought, oh my gosh. And so what I've done is I've added some of my objects as well to hers. And I carved this wooden bird and inlaid some objects into it. And typically the objects live inside inside the little pepper container. But yeah,
I
that's
love this so much. I love that she collected objects and you collect objects. This sort of transference or this transferring of becomes this tradition of collecting. It's also a human condition to collect, and that she kept it close. And of course, I don't know your grandmother, but thinking about my grandmother's, the stove was somewhere they were multiple times a day. It's
right.
it was almost a really personal space for them, and what they had on the stove. What my grandmother had something that was made by a friend, and then my other grandmother had things from her mother around the stove. So it's a really personal space, and to think about her keeping these objects she'd found and picked up and chose to put there, this
Yeah.
intentionality that then becomes a surprise to you.
That was
And
great.
I love that you have continued that and then made it into this really precious object. It's really beautiful. So then there's your next, so I wanted to know about the globes. I saw globes all over your studio. I wanted to know about the globes.
Well, again, I kind of like something and then I start collecting a lot of them. And you've got sort of two different pieces here. I'm going to start with the smaller globes, the little bank globes. Those, of course, were globes that were pretty popular. Ohio Art was one of the manufacturing companies that made them. And at the base of where the red base is, it says, "As you save, so you prosper." And I thought, oh, wow, that's interesting. And this is the same grandparents I'm going to refer to, but it's my grandfather. In this case, he was, what is the term for a stamp collector?
A philatelist? Is it a philatelist?
Yes, I thank you for saying that because I know I would have done it correctly. But he was one. And he knew that I was interested in national parks and ecology and so forth. And so he sent me a series of stamps from 1934-35 that commemorate 10 different national parks. And so it's like, Yellowstone, Yosemite, Grand Canyon, yada, yada, yada. And this is, again, how my process works. I had been collecting these globes for a long time. The stamps arrive, and I'm thinking, oh, wow, those are really wonderful. So I started putting these ideas together, and so I wrote to all 10 of the national parks, and I sent them a cardboard box with return postage and two 1-gallon Ziploc bags and a letter, because I'd already phoned them, but I had a contact there. And I requested that they send me soil from each of those national parks. And so what they did is, indeed, they did that, but being good government officials, they also sent me paperwork so that I have the permission to have that dirt, even if it's from the parking lot. But anyway, it's certified dirt from the national park. And so what I did is where the coin slot is on each of the banks, I hand cut and took a magnifying lens, which is actually out of an old binocular, and you put it in the top, and you can look in from the top, and you see the soil that's inside each one of those globes. And on the front is the postage stamp for each one of those national parks. And in the image on the shelf, it's a 7-foot long shelf, and I collect postcards as well, especially the old linen and vintage postcards. And each one of those images is from the national park that's associated with the globe above it. And in Photoshop, I strung the parks together so that it's one long continuous landscape, merging them together. And so that, really has a lot of layers to it, but it's called As You Save, So You Prosper. The globe that's above that is part of two globes. It's there's extinct and endangered, and these are 12-inch diameter globes. And in the extinct version, they're old postage stamps and scientific illustrations of plants, birds, fish, reptiles, all kinds of things that are extinct. And this one that's endangered that we have on the screen here is actually all images of the same kinds of things, plants, birds, vegetation that is endangered. And then on the outer ring of both the extinct and the endangered, there are objects that the extinct one has fossils and things that are really old and no longer around as far as I'm aware. And then on this endangered, it has things that are contemporary,
right.
but might relate to ancient things. And,
Right.
and then sometimes I have a little bit of fun, like a Susan B. Anthony
Right.
dollar is like an endangered species.
It is, and as a Susan, every time I have ever gotten, of course I don't get them anymore, but when I was little, you might get it in change, and I never could spend it because it was part of me.
There you go. That
knowing who Susan B. Anthony was, that was really important too. So it's something I collected, and so I have a little collection of Susan B. Anthony.
I love it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, let's see. There, not everything you collect has, as of yet, made it into a work of art. Is that right?
Oh yeah, I mean not everything, but everything has potential. But true. Oh boy, there's my old '66 VW Bug, which
beautiful.
I taught at San Diego State for a semester in 1999, and on the eve of the millennium, I bought this Bug in San Diego, and I listened to the ball drop in New York on the AM radio in Balboa Park in this Bug. And anyway, I just sold it last fall to a man who was just as smitten with it as I was. His father had this same color Bug, the same Bug,
exactly.
when he was growing up, and I had it for 20 years, and I love it, absolutely, still adore it. But I guess there's also that time where you have to kind of start letting go of things. And I'm a little bit in that stage, which is really difficult, but it's such a big object. And I have 2 kids that are 16. And so we have some other priorities going on right now. And so anyway, I love it. I'm not sad. I did the right thing. I found the right person.
Yes, exactly.
And you should have read the ad. It was like, hi, don't buy this because I love it. And you better love it just as much or you can't have it.
Exactly. I get to bet everyone who wants to buy it.
So anyway, I way before I owned this Bug, I was collecting miniature corgi and dinky and other kinds of VW Bugs and buses and stuff. And so I have a bunch of those that I adore.
They're wonderful, and the garage and the color variation. I mean, they're just wonderful, and the way you've got them displayed on the shelf,
thank you.
In a little parking lot, ready at any moment.
Ready to go, yeah.
Ready to go. Zoom off.
And the cool thing is, I maybe like Starry Night too. That piece at the Philbrook. There's a little bit of a childhood aspect to it. Like I can imagine myself in that parking lot, that little mini parking lot, and I can let my mind go down and, check out the cars because I've been in enough parking lots of car sales places that it feels like.
A little Chris walking around the parking lot, ready to get in and zoom off in any of them. Well, then one other image that I really love that you sent was this one. So would you tell me about this one?
Well, my wife and I are very fortunate to have twins, Anna and Henry. And when they were born, for their first birthday, we had gone to a yard sale, and my wife found this happy birthday kind of stringer that you hang across the ceiling or whatever. And so we put it up, and we went, happy first birthday. And of course, the grandparents are all there. It was a big deal. And so it came around for Sarah's birthday, my wife, and so we put up her number over the top of it. And then it was my birthday, and somebody, probably Sarah, put it up over that. And then it was the kid's second birthday, and pretty soon, my grandma, the one who had the pepper shaker on the stove, she came to visit, and we celebrated her, oh gosh, 88th birthday. And so it's somewhere underneath there too. And it just stays up year round.
I love it.
It's just part of the house. And if somebody doesn't get their numbers up there, oh my gosh, are they upset? They feel like their birthday is not validated, you know?
And each number is handmade. I mean, there's a lot of love and thought that goes into this banner.
It's pretty silly, but I have to say it's one of my favorite family objects, along with those marks on the wall to marking height. I'm now the shortest one in my family. And there's a record of it too.
It's documented. It's documented.
Right.
Well, I guess the last thing I wanted to look at was this, and you referenced it earlier. So Starry Night. So this is part of Philbrook's collection. It's on view. We love it. People come to find it. Again, it's something about looking at the objects, finding all of the little objects, and then if you look in the raking light, and you can see kind of this embossing on the surface, and it's truly beautiful. And we're so pleased to have it in our collection. But it has a secret that I really had forgotten about. So would you tell us the secret?
Well, sure. Yeah, the embossing you're describing is actually acid etching. So those are silk screened on images and acid etched into the copper, which then has a paint rubbed into the blue surface. In the middle, which is, of course, referencing deep space and looking up into the night sky, the little white dots actually have a little impressed ring within a ring in them, which is a whole nother story unto itself that's really important to my art making, but we'll save that for another time. But what happens is that is a glow-in-the-dark material, and the birds that are cast bronze birds are also covered with a glow-in-the-dark material. So back in '94, when you charged it with light, just daylight, and then you shut off the lights, you had basically a flock of birds flying through the night sky. And now that it is, what is it? How many years is it? 26 years? I don't know if it still works or not. It might.
Try it.
But that was the intent anyway. And I'm just so pleased that people enjoy looking into it. And I hope, very much like the table, that it brings some kind of joy and hope and reference to moments in their lives. And for me, there's sort of a magic and mystery in space and nature. And I hope that this kind of captures at least the essence of that in some way, very abstract way. And I think it has a childlike quality, which I love naive art, children's art. There's an honesty to it and a directness, and it's something I think that's just part of our human nature.
I think so too. And I think there's something about either memories or imagining going around and picking up objects, whether they're stones or marbles or things you find, picking them up, but then this wonder and discovery of how you've arranged them. So there are so many layers to your artworks, and the recollection table is, I can't wait for people to, and here we'll get our bigger pictures out. I can't wait for people to be able to come into the gallery and really see and explore and see all of these layers. We'll have to try charging Starry Night and see if we can see those layers again. But there's these imagined layers and layers of memory, layers of collective memory, your memory. And so we're really so pleased and excited to have it. And at some point we will open back up and our visitors will be able to see it. And I really appreciate your visiting with us today so that we can kind of get into your process. And now we're imagining ourselves in your studio going through all of the bowls and looking and exploring. So thank you, Chris.
Oh, it's totally my pleasure. And thank you for taking your time to interview me. I appreciate it.
We appreciate you. So at some point we'll open back up, and we hope that you'll be able to come and look at the table with us and explain some of the objects in person.
Yeah, I obviously have not had a chance to see the exhibition either. I'm super excited about it, so I can't wait till it opens.
Okay, it's a deal. So thanks,
right.
Chris, and we'll
Thank
see
you.
everyone next time.
All right, bye.
Bye.